Okay, guys, I think we can start this second lesson of Private Equity Venture Capital course. As you remember, in this first part of the course, which is devoted to the analysis of the general framework and legal framework and fiscal framework of Private Equity Venture Capital, we focus on the very first part, which is devoted to the fundamentals of Private Equity Venture Capital. You remember that yesterday we highlighted in the whiteboard the 4 issues which are relevant to understand the fundamentals of private equity venture capital. And we specified that it's necessary, first of all, to discuss about the definition of private equity and venture capital. Second, we have to go on in discussing the company and entrepreneur's perspective that needs an intervention of private equity venture capital. Third issue, it's necessary to analyze and to understand the perspective of the investor in the company. And last, which is more time-consuming and important and relevant, it's necessary to discuss about the different clusters of private equity venture capital. You remember, okay, the scheme we used yesterday. Definition, it's okay, I hope. Just to know, in every session I would like to spend 2 or 3 minutes like a very short summary of the previous lesson, so I think it's useful for you. Definition, I gave to you a definition of private equity venture capital. You remember, we have understood, I hope, that private equity is a very broad definition. Take care about the usage of definition following an American approach or a European approach. As I mentioned in this course, I use the American approach. That means private equity is a broad definition, is the umbrella definition. We focus on the main difference between private equity and public equity, and a more theoretical side, we discuss also about the difference between private equity and corporate finance. It's important because private equity is a part of corporate finance, because private equity, it's a tool that a company uses to collect money. Okay, you remember, because private equity is an investment to finance a company, so private equity is a tool to collect money, so private equity is a part of corporate finance. But take care, because in private equity we don't apply the pillars, the fundamental of corporate finance, and we identified 4 different reasons to specify this issue. Later we move on the topic number 2, which is the entrepreneur, the company perspective. Okay, so we started from a very simple question: why does a company need money? Okay, and the answer was a company needs money because there is a mismatching between two variables, and the 2 variables are the use of funds, the use of money, the usage of money, whereas usage of money means investment in fixed assets and working capital, okay? And the other variable is sources of money, where sources of money means the cash flow, okay? Cash flow is the machine that generates cash inside a company. So there is this mismatch, this difference. If the difference is positive, obviously the company needs for money. If the difference is negative, obviously the company is a cash cow, is able to generate more money than the need for money. Okay, you remember? Later we specified that this difference, this mismatch, is strictly related to the stage of the life of the company. And we identified 6 different stages, which generally in the practitioner's language are named as the stages which characterize the life of a company. Okay? For each stage, the difference, the mismatch between the usage and the sources of funds is different, and also the drivers that justify the need for money are completely different. We have to come back to this scheme because we have to start the lesson for today from this scheme. Help me to remember the different stages that we can use to identify the story of a company. Help me to remember the stage number 1 is development, the stage number 2 is startup, okay, and we specify that in these 2 stages, investment in fixed assets are the driver that justify the need for money. Just to remember, investment in fixed assets. Later we move to early growth and fast growth, you remember? And in these 2 cases, the main driver is not investment in fixed assets, but is investment in working capital. So there is a need for money coming from the working capital because there is a sales growth and the company needs working capital to finance development. Later we have to move to the so-called mature age. In mature age, the company doesn't need money both for investment in fixed assets and for working capital. The main common characteristic of mature age, if the company needs money, because sometimes the company doesn't need money, okay, but is able to produce money. But if a company needs money in mature age, generally this money are used to buy other companies, so to launch the so-called M&A campaign. I need money because I have to buy my competitors, I have to buy market share, and I have to pay for it. It's the typical characteristic and the typical story of a mature age company. Last, there is the last phase, sometimes is a very sad phase, which is crisis or decline. In this case, the driver for the need of money is the lack, sorry, not the lack, the fall, but sometimes the lack of profitability. So the company needs for money because of the lack and the fall of profitability. So these are the different stages, okay? The problem for today is, okay, in these different stages, the company needs for money and the driver of this need are completely different, okay? But a company can satisfy this need using both debt and equity, okay? It's obvious. I have a need of money, and I can satisfy this need using debt and using equity. So we have to understand why I use debt, why I use equity. And the second question is, okay, my assumption is that I need equity. That's great. Why I need the intervention of a private equity, okay? An intervention of a private equity is something which is not simple, because yesterday, you remember I said, to stay with a private equity is a marriage. So there is a lot of involvement, a lot of constraints, a lot of rules we have to write. Why a company needs a private equity? It's crazy a company to ask for the intervention of a private equity. So we have to jump into this area and to discover this kind of topics. In terms of teaching strategy, my opinion is that it's better to work on a sort of scheme that help you to understand better why a company needs debt, why a company needs equity, and when the company uses the private equity. So it's necessary to use a scheme to classify these different issues. We can work in that way. First of all, we can identify the area of equity, and second, we can identify the area of debt. So equity and debt. My idea now is to identify who are the potential players, the potential player that can give money through equity to the company, and who are the potential player that can give money through debt to the company. So it's quite useful because we can create a matrix in which, in this column, we have the different stages of a company. On the other side of the matrix, we can identify the players that can give money to the company through equity and debt. And per stage, we can identify when a company needs for equity, when a company needs for debt, and who are the players that are used. Between these players, among these players, it's obvious that we find also the private equity investor. And so we can have a matrix in which we classify needs and players that can give money to the company. Is it okay? Let's start the game. Please help me, please don't read the slide, because some people it's obviously download the slides and you have the metrics in front of you. But from a logical point of view, who are the potential players that can give equity to the company? Try to identify a sort of hierarchy between the different players that can provide equity to the company. The first player that can provide equity to the company is help me. Try to identify a sort of hierarchy of potential player that can give money through equity to the company. The player number one is
entrepreneur.
Yeah, he's an entrepreneur, he's the founder, okay? The first player that can provide money to the company is the founder, okay? Okay? In a more trivial way, but you can read it on books and very serious handbooks, we don't use the label founder, but we use the sentence family and friends, okay? It's more trivial, but also in very serious handbooks. You don't find the label founder, but family and friends, okay? That's great. It's the first provider of equity. You want to launch a company, please provide money. You are the founder. You don't have money, give a call to mom and daddy, okay, and other friends, okay? Yes, it's the story of equity investment. Okay, the founder. Second, who is the second players that can provide money through equity to the company? Family and friends. Second.
Private equity.
No, it's a long story. Private equity stay there at the end of equity, okay?
Venture capitalists.
No, venture capitalists are private equity. Please remember the definition of yesterday. Private equity is the umbrella definition. Venture capital is inside private equity.
Venture capitalists wouldn't be like from the beginning to like say the middle of the company's timeline. No.
Private equity is the umbrella definition. Private equity investor is private equity investor. Inside private equity, we have a venture capital, and you can say venture capital investor or venture capitalist, but the brand name is private equity investor. So please remember that. After the founder, we can have other partner, okay? Not only family and friends, but we can have other partner. Okay?
What do you mean by other?
It's a difference. Let's imagine your name is, okay, Luca. It's a bad day for you today. I have to use you like a sparring partner. Your colleague, you stay there. It's a very smart strategy. Okay, next week, okay, in the very last position. Okay, Luca, your name. Okay. Okay, let's imagine Luca would like to start a company. Great. Okay, the first solution is to use your money. You have money? A bit. Okay, 10 euros is not enough. However, if you don't have money, you can call family and friends to collect money, and you are the owner. But if family and friends are not able to provide money, you have to give a call to, your name is? Francesco. That's great. You give a call to Francesco, which is not family and friends, okay? It's another private individual, and you say, Francesco, do you want to join with me in this new venture? I invest equity, and also Francesco invests equity. But in this company, we have two different shareholders. When we give a call to family and friends, the shareholder is only one, you understand? In this case, I try to involve other partners which are not linked through family ties, okay? It's a different stories. We have two different shareholders in the companies. So it's the second players to provide money. The third player, founders or family and friends, other partners. We have other two players in the equity story. We have a third player. It's a very important definition you have to know from today. This third player is the so-called business angels. What is a business angel? Business angel is generally a foundation, a public institution, or a no-profit institution that provides money to a company, not simply for an economic returns, but mostly for a social return. Okay? So, Luca, your name? Okay. You collect money from family and friends. You don't want to stay with Francesco, okay? Francesco is a bad guy, it's better not to have this kind of shareholder. But you need for other money. What you can do? In Europe it's not so common, but you can, looking for a private foundation, where in the mission of this private foundation there is giving money to young entrepreneurs to develop new company. So you ask for money to this foundation, you said, Dear Stefano Caselli Foundation, I need 2 million euros because I'm a young entrepreneur and I would like to develop these new ventures. I heard that you provide money to young entrepreneurs, you invest like equity investor. I know that you don't put any pressure on my company because you want to have, it's obvious, a financial return, but especially you want to have a social return, okay, from my venture. This is the player of business angel. We have to discuss a lot about business angel in the second part of the course when we will discuss about, I don't know if you remember the syllabus, about market competition and competitive strategies. So business angels are one of the players in the private equity market, but they are very important to provide money to company, business angels. Give me example of business angels in Europe. Because in the United States and in the United Kingdom we have a lot of business angels, private foundation, charity, also universities invest like business angels. They are very lucky because they have a lot of money. So these are examples of business angels all around US and UK. Give me examples, also the Bill Gates Foundation is, okay, a business angel that provides money to companies. Also Tony Blair Foundation is a business angel that provides money to young entrepreneurs to develop new ventures for financial return, but mostly for social return. Okay? Give me examples of business angels in Europe or in Italy. Names of business angels.
There's a program in Ireland called Enterprise Ireland. Sorry,
it was the right question. I don't want to know exactly the name of business angels. I would like to know names of categories of business angels, even though your answer was absolutely right. Thank you. It's very common, for example, in Italy, France, and Spain. Banking foundation. Banking foundation are the shareholders of many banks all around Europe. Banking foundation are no-profit institutions, and in the goal, in the statement of the mission of banking foundation, there is in some banking foundation to provide money to company, to young entrepreneur, to start up, to develop. Okay? For what reason? Not only for financial return, but also for social return. Okay? Please take care, when I say social return, it's not charity. I don't give money to Luca, right? Luca, it was your, okay. I don't give money to Luca because of charity. I give to you 1 million euros, doesn't matter about the usage, okay? I give to you 1 million euros because I would like that you launch a new companies, so I would like to have internal rate of return, but it's not the first driver. For me, it's more important that you develop a company in order that you create wealth, you create new jobs, new possibility for new people to enter your company and to develop their jobs and so on. Okay? It's not charity, but financial return is not the main driver. Okay? Business angel. And last, the last players in equity is private equity investor, obviously. Private equity investor. Okay? To come back to the question of your colleague, when a private equity investor invests in some cluster, can be named venture capitalist, but is always a private equity investor. Okay? These are the 4 players that in human life can provide equity to a company. Let's move to debt. In debt, we have simply 2 providers of debt. It's easier. Who are the providers of debt? Yeah, but the banking system is not the first. The first is trade credit. Suppliers. Trade credit is the first source of debt. Okay? Trade credit. Trade credit. You understand? Trade credit is fundamental. Okay? It's the easiest way to finance your company. What is the easiest way to finance your company? I don't give money to the supplier. Very simple. It's the easiest way to finance a company. Okay? Exactly what's happening in 2008 and 2009 for all the big companies. Okay? What is happening in Europe? The big companies, like to give names Fiat, BMW, Mercedes, all the big companies in Europe suffer because they don't have money. And what is the easiest way to finance themselves? To give a call to the supplier and to say, dear suppliers, my name is Fiat. The bad news for you is that I don't pay you. Thank you very much. This is trade credit, okay? If I'm very big, it's the typical way to finance yourself, okay? If you are a small company, trade credit, very difficult. Because if I'm a Stefano Caselli company with 1 million euros of sales, I give a call to my supplier and I say, dear supplier, I don't pay you. You say, Stefano, you are crazy. I'm a big supplier. I come to your home and you give money to me. Thank you very much. But if I'm very big and you are a small supplier, you cannot do that. This is the game. Trade credit, trade credit. And the second provider of that is the banking system, obviously. That's great, but we are missing something. What we are missing is a last column, which is devoted both to debt and equity. And the last provider of money is, which is for debt and equity, is the financial market. Okay? So in this matrix, we have a very powerful scheme we have to apply to classify who are the providers of debt, who are the providers of equity, and we identified also a sort of a hierarchy between the different providers. Hierarchy means that from a logical point of view, but not only from a logical point of view, from empirical evidences in the market, a company starts from this provider and move through these providers to get at the end, at the last provider, which is the financial market, which is the more complex provider of money, both for debt and equity. Do you agree? There is a sort of natural hierarchy between the different providers of money. Okay? Let's start the game to identify for every stage who are the main providers of money. In order that we have really a scheme you can apply to understand and to match the stage with the main providers of money for every stage. Please.
How would you fit the government? Like, for example, in Brazil, they have like a special bank designed for investing in small companies, like giving that at a low interest, for example.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very difficult, in my opinion, to insert a column in which we said government. Okay? My opinion is that we can find the governments inside and or behind different players. Just to give to you an example, in some countries, Italy was an example of that, the government was inside business angels. It's very common nowadays, for example, in Spain, but also in UK, in which UK government acts as a business angel to provide money to company. In some cases, also United States, for example, we have a private equity investor which are owned by the government. In other cases, governments give money to the company through the banking system. So it's very difficult, or it's a nonsense, to create a column government, because government can stay behind different players, okay? It depends from the country and for the story of the country, but we can find government behind every player. That's the reason why I didn't insert a specific column for government. Let's start to identify the specific area for the specific stage. Let's start for development. From a logical point of view, who are the main providers of money? In development, who are the main providers of money? I would like to differentiate main provider with providers that we can use sometimes. Main provider are or is absolutely the founder. Other partner and business angels can play a role in development? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. In development, you need money because you want to develop a business idea, okay? It's a very high-risk business. You don't have the company, you need money to develop the business idea, okay? You understand? To develop a business idea doesn't mean to write a business model on a paper. To develop a business idea means, dear family and friends, give me 50 million euros because I would like to run a research project to discover a new solution to fight the cancer to liver or to other part of the body. This is why I need money for development, okay? I need money to run a research project to create a new product. Who can provide this kind of money? The banking system? Absolutely not. It's not possible. The trade credit? No, we don't find suppliers that give money because I would like to run a research project. The only possibility is to use your money because you don't have any expectation of return. It's a gamble, you understand? Other partners, if you find, okay, if you wanted to help Luca in this very crazy idea, but you can use money, it's typical from business angel. Because especially in development, it's more important social return than financial return. Private equity investor, it makes sense? Sometimes. When I use the black pen, it's the main provider. When I use the blue one, sometimes. So in some cases, we have to study it in the part number 4, when we'll discuss about clusters. We can have some private equity investor, named venture capitalist, that can provide money also to finance development. Quite risky, but sometimes. Debt and financial market, it's a nonsense. It's not possible. For what reason? Because we don't have any possibility to fix expected cash flow for this project. If you cannot fix the cash flow, it's not possible to use debt. It's not possible to use that.
consider that when, like, for example, the entrepreneur makes that to, like, for example, he makes a mortgage, or if he gets a loan from the bank, using his house as a collateral to finance his project, would it be like a debt?
But it's not related to the capability of the company. Sorry, it's a quite tricky question. If Luca has a lot of money, okay, personally, okay, and would like to run the famous project for cancer, 50 million euros, and Luca says, I would like to give to the banking system a collateral, which is my house, and I can repay the banks using my personal cash flow, and the cash flow of my wife, doesn't matter, but you understand that is not the company that is able to repay the debt. It's the personal story of Luca and his wife and his family, okay? But to come back to this table, the banking system doesn't provide money to the company, okay? Let's move to startup. In the case of startup, who are the main providers? The same providers of the previous story, in your opinion? You want to launch a startup. Who are the main providers? Exactly the same of development, exactly the same. Because in startup, you start the engine of your company, you need money, and it's quite risky, and sometimes it's quite impossible to forecast the cash flow for the future. So typically the providers of money are the founder itself, other partners, business angel, and private equity. Absolutely. Because it's not possible for a debt financer to give money to the company because there are no expectation of cash flow, or it's very difficult to forecast the cash flow. Is it okay till now? Questions? Early growth and fast growth. In your opinion, we can move into the debt area. We can use providers belonging to the equity area. What is your feeling? Early growth and fast growth, they are quite similar in a certain sense. Your ideas? We use debt in early growth and fast growth? Absolutely. What kind of debt? Trade credit? Yeah? Sorry. Banking system? Absolutely. We don't have the startup. We have to finance what in early growth and fast growth? What you have to finance? The working capital. So it's the typical job for the banking system. But also private equity can be used, because if the need for money coming from the working capital is very high, probably the banking system is not able to provide a huge amount of money, and also the private equity intervention can be useful. Mature age. Who are the players that can finance the company in mature age? Founder? No, probably not. Other partner? No. Business angels? No, it's not a job for the business angel. Social return, it's perfect social return for development and startup, not for other job. Private equity to finance mature age, that means to finance M&A campaign, acquisition campaign. It's a good job for private equity. Yeah, absolutely. Because the company needs a lot of money, and this campaign can be very, very risky. So it's a good job for private equity investor. Trade credit. You finance acquisition through trade credit. What do you think, Francesco? Right. You think trade credit? No. No, it's not possible. The banking system? Yeah, probably is not exactly the main provider, but the banking system can do that. Financial marketing, your opinion? Yes. Absolutely, because we have a mature company. When the company is mature, the company has the standing and the reputation to stay in the financial market and to ask for money through debt and through equity to the financial market. A company must be mature to stay in the financial market and to ask for money. And last, crisis. In crisis, there is a lack, there is a fall on profitability, and we have to understand, okay, who are the providers of money? It's a very, very hard job to provide money to a company which stay in a crisis. Who are the provider? Trade, credit, and banking system, in your opinion, are the providers of money for a company that stay in a crisis? No, no. Equity and financial market. What do you think about financial market and equity? Financial market makes sense for a company that stay in a crisis? You know company that stay in a crisis ask for money to the stock exchange? No. It's very difficult. Probably you have a lot of reputation, but you don't find people that would like to buy your shares. So we have to come back again to equity. Who are the providers of money? The founder again, obviously, because we stay in a crisis and we have to come back to family and friends. Other partners, if we find other partners, because when you stay in a crisis, you don't have other partners. Okay? When you are very strong, you have a lot of potential partners, a lot of family and friends. When you stay in a crisis, you stay by yourself. Okay? Private equities, yes, absolutely. Private equity is a very hard and dirty job, but we can have private equity. Okay? Very simple, but quite important, because through this scheme you can cross together the different phases, the different stages of the company with the different potential players. And we can say there is a sort of hierarchy and a sort of natural movement in which we start from the equity area and stage by stage we move to the area of debt and to the area of financial market. Even a private equity investor potentially can play a role in whatever stage of a company life. And now it's a question for you. For what reason a private equity investor can potentially play a role in every stage of a company life? What are, in your opinion, the benefits? That means the reasons why a company can meet potentially for the intervention of a private equity in whatever stage of its life. And this is a question for you. It's a big question because it's related to the importance of this course. Because if we don't find reasons, it's a nonsense, the course, you understand?
Usually, entrepreneurs like someone who has not as much skills as a private equity investor, for example.
But what do you mean by skills? Because it's quite important.
Experience, private equity investors has gone through...
Experience, take care. Experience in what?
New ventures, like you want to make a new fast food restaurant. The guy in private equity might have work with some sort of business similar to that one, for example.
Yeah, but you remember that yesterday I mentioned that a private equity investor is a financial institution which is devoted to invest in shares of not listed company. You remember? That means a private equity investor is an investor. I can help you in many activities, but you are the entrepreneur. Take care about that.
Well, won't the private equity investor sometimes be on the board of decisions, for example?
Yeah, but it's, no. To stay in the board decision, remember, come back to the lesson of yesterday, to stay in the board is not a benefit for the entrepreneur. Absolutely. To stay in the board is a mechanism in order that a private equity can control you.
But when you, for example, in crisis, you like...
No.
You're desperate for some sort of management, consulting, another private equity.
No. My question is, who are the benefits of a private equity investors? And what are the reasons why private equity is relevant in whatever stages of a company life? This is the question for you. It's not so difficult. There are two very big benefits. After we can discuss a lot about supporting activity, yes, but we have two very main important drivers to justify why the private equity intervention is good in whatever kind of stage and why it can be useful for the company. Two main drivers. Two main drivers. The driver number one is the so-called certification effect. The driver number one is the so-called certification effect. If one of the shareholders is a private equity, that means if you ask for the intervention of a private equity, this is a very powerful signal you give to the market to justify and to demonstrate your quality. It's the certification effect. Okay? Let's imagine you are launching a startup. Okay, is an example, okay? You are launching a startup, nobody knows you, the business is quite strange, okay? Let's imagine, sorry for that, nobody knows Luca, okay? Nobody knows Luca. The business that you want to create, it's very strange. I don't understand, but what I see is that a very famous private equity investor invested in the company of Luca. For what reason? I don't understand. I don't know personally Luca, but it's a very strong signal. Okay? It's a very strong signal because the signal is a very important private equity screened a lot the company of Luca. Probably the valuation of the private equity is that it's a very good business idea. Luca is quite strong, and it's a very positive signal. After the intervention, the day after the intervention of the private equity, the banking system starts knocking to the door of Luca to say, "Dear Luca, we are here. We would like to give you loans and other services." For what reason? We don't know, but there is a private equity investor between your shareholders. So the certification effect. Sometimes you need this certification effect. In other cases, you don't need, because if you are very powerful, you are very famous, in startup or in other phases, you don't need a certification effect. You understand? That means you are very strong, you stay in startup, the money coming from the founder and other partners are okay, you don't need a certification effect, you don't need a private equity investor. Okay? But if you need to be certified, okay, you need a private equity investor intervention. This is the first driver. Okay? The second important driver, which is linked to what your colleague mentioned before, is the so-called network effect. Certification effect, network effect. What is network effect? If you ask for the intervention of a private equity, the private equity investor can provide to you potentially many services. Potentially means, as your colleague mentioned before, the private equity can provide to you consulting activity, advisory activity, mentoring activity. It depends from the story, okay? But what is common for all the private equity investors is that the private equity investor gives to you the entrance to its personal network, okay? That means you have Stefano Caselli, private equity investor, between your shareholders. I can help you, I can support you, but what is important is that I give to you the key to enter my personal network. Personal network of what? Of suppliers, of customers, of technology, of governments, and so on. Let's imagine, if you want to enter the Indian market, okay, you can have whatever kind of business plan and big ideas, but if you don't have lobbying skill to enter, is an example, the Indian market, you cannot enter. Why you need a private equity investor? You need a private equity investor if the private equity stays in the Indian market and is able to manage the network of Indian community. This is quite important because I enter between your shareholders and I give to you the key to enter the Indian market. is exactly what you want. So please remember, certification effects and network effects are the two main drivers and the two main reasons why you can need the intervention of private equity investor. Obviously, please don't forget that a private equity, but it's self-explaining, but please don't forget, a private equity investor doesn't give to you simply certification effect and network effects, but, and sometimes is wonderful, a private equity investor gives to you potentially a lot of money, okay? And in some cases, in many cases, network effect and certification are important, but also to have a lot of money is quite wonderful, okay? Okay, guys, it's absolutely very important. And certification and network effect can be important in whatever stage of a company life, okay? When we discuss about the different clusters and when we discuss about deals of private equity, we always have to come back to this concept, certification effect and network effect, which are really two main drivers of private equity understanding. Questions about it? Is it okay? Please.
Private equity gives money in the crisis stage. Who would get paid first if the company became profitable again, the financial market or the private equity?
In case of default?
No, in case of profitability again, and you have to pay off, financial markets or private equity, who gets money first?
Sorry, I don't exactly understand. When you say where's the money first, it's a typical question for default.
Oh yeah, debt holders get paid before equity holders, but where does private equity fit in?
It depends from the category of shares that you bought. It depends from that. Because if you bought special shares, in case of default, you are paid before the financial market. If you have common shares, you are paid exactly in the same time of money. It depends from the shares. It's a very important question. It's a bit early to discuss about it. We have to discuss a lot about it in the third part of the course when we'll discuss about the management of private equity, in which we have to discuss about the contracts and the category of shares and so on. So it's not possible to give to you a general answer to your question. It depends from the category of shares that you buy, but also for the financial market. Now, this is the story of company perspective. But now we have to go on and to say, okay, this is the story of the company. I would like to change the perspective and to say, this is the story of the company. I would like to focus on the story of the investor, which is the issue number 3 in this part, which is devoted to the fundamentals of private equity. So now you have to discuss about the private equity investor perspective. Whereas the private equity investor perspective is absolutely relevant in whatever kind of stages of the life of the company, because we highlighted the private equity column for every stage. So now we have to understand what are the drivers, what are the characteristics of private equity intervention in the different stage of the company. Okay? The first thing we have to do is to create a taxonomy for this issue. It's quite important because our problem now is to try to understand what is the perspective of the investor, of the private equity investor, in every stage of a company life. Okay? So we have to understand what is the perspective, what are the drivers that justify the intervention of the private equity into the different stages. Taxonomy, what does it mean? We have to use the common language of practitioners in private equity that use specific labels to give a name to the different stage when they are using the private equity perspective. This taxonomy is very important because now we identify the different clusters of private equity. Because you remember the topic number 4 is the cluster of private equity. And why we have clusters of private equity? You have clusters because the private equity investors invest into different stages of a company life. So we have to give a specific label for every stage of a company life to give a name to the private equity intervention. And to give a name means to identify the 6 clusters of private equity. When a private equity investor invests in development, the common label we find in every part of the world is seed financing. Seed financing. The financing of the seed, the financing of the idea. Okay? Second, when a private equity invests in startup, it is called startup financing. You see there is the label financing, to remember that every private equity deal is a deal of investing in equity, but is a story of financing a company. Remember, coming from the definition of private equity. Investing in early growth is called early growth financing. Number 4, investing in fast growth is called expansion financing. Number 5, investing in mature age company is called replacement financing. And last, to invest in company, in a company which stay in crisis and or decline is called vulture or distressed financing. Okay? These are the names private equity players, private equity practitioners use to give a name to the different intervention of private equity into the different stages of the life of a company. Okay? This is a very important taxonomy because in this way we identified the 6 clusters of private equity. When I say 6 clusters, for me it's quite important that from now you start remembering that 6 clusters mean 6 different markets. And when I say 6 different markets, it means 6 different competitive systems. Because in every market, you will find different players, different rules, different strategies, different positioning of private equity. Okay? So when you will have the possibility and the chance to discuss with the 3 guest speakers I invited in this course. These 3 guest speakers belong to 3 different private equity players which stay into different clusters. So they are not competitors because they stay into different clusters. Okay? Just to come back to the definition, seed financing, startup, and early growth financing are called altogether venture capital. And now we discover, okay, what is the meaning of venture capital, okay? Venture capital is the common label to give a name to 3 different clusters, which are seed financing, startup financing, and early growth financing. So now we discover the problem of yesterday. In United States and United Kingdom, when we say private equity, this is private equity, and inside we have venture capital. In Europe, this is venture capital, and this is private equity. Okay? This is the story just to understand the different usage of words. Okay? So take care, because also in Europe, journalists and people writing or pamphlets and books, in some cases uses private equity in the European way, in other cases uses private equity in the American way. So if you stay in Europe and you discuss with other people and you are meaning private equity, try to understand what is the definition that the man or the woman in front of you is using. Okay, take care. Because in some cases, you are discussing with a man or a woman that use private equity in the strict sense of Europe, and private equity means expansion, replacement plus vulture. In other cases, private equity is the common. So take care about the usage of words. In this course, I do prefer to use the American approach, so private equity is the umbrella definition that covers the 6 clusters. Absolutely the best in my opinion, but this is my opinion, obviously. So it's very important, but now what you have to do is the following. Okay, we have 6 clusters. To have 6 clusters means that, very simple what I would like to say, but important. In seed financing and startup financing, the private equity or the venture capitalist finances what? The investment in fixed assets. In early growth and in expansion, the private equity is financing the working capital, right? In replacement financing, the private equity is financing what? The M&A campaign. In vulture financing, the private equity investor is financing the lack and or the fall of profitability. So completely different jobs, you understand? Because you are financing variables and stories which are completely different of the company. Is it okay? But now we have to do some more important. We would like to find a sort of common root, a common characteristic between the different 6 stages and the role of the private equity investor in the company. And to give a common root or a general definition of intervention of private equity, we have to come back to the very simple formula we specified yesterday. Yesterday we specified why money, and we said why money because there is a difference between usage of funds minus sources of funds. Is it okay? You remember? And we said, okay, usage of funds means investing in fixed asset and working capital, and sources of funds is the cash flow. You remember? What I would like to do, because now we stay in the investor perspective, is to try to transform this sentence in a formula. If we are able to transform this sentence, this definition in a formula, for us, and especially for the equity investor, is possible to identify the trend of the need for money. And to identify the trend for the need of money is absolutely fundamental for a private equity investor. Because a private equity investor has to verify what is the amount of money the company needs, and for how many time and how long the company needs this amount of money. But to give an answers to those questions is fundamental to create a formula in which you are able to monitor and to measure the need for money of the company through the life cycle of the company itself. Okay? So let's try to transform this sentence in a formula. First of all, what is the technical name of why money? What is the name of this difference? If you use the language of investor that has to invest in a company and to give money to a company, what is the name of the difference between usage of funds and sources of funds? What is the technical name? Please? Financial need. Okay, the difference between usage of funds and sources of funds is called financial need. In some papers, handbooks, and so on, is called the financial gap. It's the same story, okay? So our problem is now to calculate the financial need or the financial gap, not in a sentence, but in a time t. So we need a formula, because I would like to measure the financial gap not in a single stage, but through the life cycle of the company. I want to create a formula. So the financial gap in a time t, in order that we are able to measure the financial gap moving from the time 0 to a time, whatever kind of time. So our problem now is to transform these two variables from a sentence to a formula, okay? So if I want to transform the usage of funds, which are fixed assets, and working capital in a formula, what we can do? We have to come back probably to very, very preliminary knowledge, probably forget it, of business administration. The usage of funds is driven by which variable? If you want to calculate the amount of money a company uses in a certain time t, you have to use which variables? I repeat, if I want to calculate what is the usage of money for my company in 2009, which variable I have to use? No, absolutely. It's a source of fund. This is the usage of fund. The challenge is to transform in a formula the concept of a fixed asset and working capital. Okay? This is your challenge, to transform a fixed asset and working capital into a formula. Okay? Because usage of funds is driven, you remember, from fixed asset and working capital. You cannot use in another way money. Okay? You can spend only in fixed asset and working capital. It's obvious that you can spend also to have costs, but costs are in the cash flow, obviously. Okay? Try to transform it. If you want to represent the usage of funds is driven from what? From two variables.
Capital expenditure.
No. Usage of funds depends from two variables, which are: the variable number one is called capital intensity. Capital intensity is investment on sales. Investment on sales, where investment means fixed asset plus working capital. What is capital intensity? What is the meaning of capital intensity? Capital intensity means how many euros I have to spend in asset to produce €1 of sales. Capital intensity. How many euros of investment you have to spend to produce €1 of sales. Okay? What is the capital intensity of Air France? Not of Alitalia. It's better not to discuss about Alitalia. What's the capital intensity of Air France? Higher, lower? I would like to hear from you the number. What is the capital intensity of Air France? 9. 9 means that to produce €1 of sales, you need to invest €9 on the asset side, where 9 means fixed asset plus working capital. The capital intensity is tremendously high. For what reason? Because to manage an airline company is a business in which the need for capital, for fixed capital, is tremendously high. What is the capital intensity of McKinsey, the consulting company? What is the capital intensity of McKinsey? Seriously. Not low, it's lower than Air France. I have no doubt about it. What is the capital intensity of McKinsey? 1.3. That means to produce €1 of sales, McKinsey needs €1.3 of capital. Why capital intensity is very low for McKinsey? Because McKinsey doesn't need airplanes, doesn't need equipment, doesn't need machinery and plant. McKinsey has working capital and some buildings. That's it. 1 euro of sales, and you need 1.3 euro of asset to produce this. Capital intensity, okay, it's the first driver to understand and to justify why a company spends money, uses money. That capital intensity is a number per euro of sales, okay? If you want to calculate the usage of funds as a whole, you have to multiply the capital intensity per the variation of sales, Delta sales in time t, that means obviously sales in time t minus sale in time t minus 1. If you want to know how many money you have to spend in a year, in a time t, you have to multiply the capital intensity of the company per the variation of sales. So this is the formula to calculate what is the usage of funds of a company in a certain time t. If you want to know the financial needs, you have to consider the cash flow of the company in the time t minus 1. For what reason? It's very simple, because there is a mismatching between the usage and the source. Okay? There is a mismatching. Okay? Because the cash flow is produced in the past, you have money, and with this money you start to invest. So there is a logical mismatch between the sources of fund and the usage of funds. So this is the algorithm, this is the formula we can use to understand what is the equity investor perspective. Why it's quite important? Because using this formula, we can have a measure of the trend of the financial need of the company stage after stage. So if you are able to understand the trend of usage of funds and the sources of funds, it's possible to have a measure of the financial need. Okay? This formula is quite important because every day, every time you have to evaluate a business plan of a company, numbers are important. Colors of the slides are very important. The name of a consultant is very important. But at the very end of the day, if you are a private equity investor, you want to know how many money Stefano Caselli needs in the future, okay? And to calculate how many money Stefano Caselli needs, you have to come back to this algorithm and to say, okay, there is the business plan, but in the business plan, what is relevant for me are 3 numbers. And the 3 numbers are capital intensity, the variation of sales, and the cash flow. If I have these 3 numbers, for me, as a private equity investor, it's enough. Because I can measure the trend of the financial need in the time. Okay? Questions about it? Questions? We start using numbers, and we say, okay, we have the formula, and now we try to apply this formula to numbers. Okay? We have to use the first file of Excel you find in the web. I divided this Excel file into 2 different sections. Now we start to use it. In the section number 1, I insert this formula, and we start to use this formula just to understand the functioning of the formula. Okay? And to say, okay, we have a formula, let's start to apply this formula to numbers. In the second section of the Excel file, I insert an example of a company which is an airline company, just to say, okay, let's try to apply this formula to a real example, and this real example is a startup of airline companies. To see, okay, we have the formula, let's start to apply to numbers. What is important for me is 2 different stories. First of all, when there is a formula, it's better, in my opinion, not simply to keep the formula in your mind, but it's quite important to start to use numbers just to see the functioning of the formula. But second, what is very, very important for me is, if we have numbers, let's start understanding what is your perspective as a private equity investor. So we have to look numbers, and we have to start to think, okay, we are the private equity investor. What is the meaning of this number if you want to invest in the company? Okay? After the analysis of numbers, we come back to the whiteboard, and I give to you the scheme and the theory to understand better the meaning of numbers. But I do prefer now to crunch number and to try to discuss together about it. So start to make numbers bigger. I don't know if it is okay. Okay, that's great. The right button. It's the first time I push the button, it's the right button. It's incredible. I'm satisfied of it. So let's give a look to this table. This is an example in which numbers has known sense. Okay, I insert some numbers. My goal now is simply to apply the formula and to give a look to the functioning. Later we move to a real example. But let's start with this formula. In this formula, what you find? You find, I hope, exactly the definition I specified in the whiteboard. Time. Sales. Delta sales. Investment, whereas investment means fixed asset and working capital. Cash flow. And financial need or financial gap. Is it okay? Just to help you to remember, here we have the formula. The financial need or the financial gap in a time t is capital intensity, investment divided by sales, multiplied per the variation of sales, S in time t minus S in time t minus 1, minus the cash flow in time t minus 1. Okay? The formula we see in the whiteboard. Let's start to give a look to numbers, okay? Let's imagine that these numbers are written in the business plan, because if you are a private equity investor, you are not interested in the past, because you have to finance what? Remember what is written behind. You have to finance the investment in startup and seed, you have to finance the working capital, you have to finance the M&A campaign, or you have to finance the lack of profitability. So you have to finance something for the future. So for you it's fundamental to have the business plan and the data of the company in the future. This is the business plan of our company. In the business plan, which is calculated, I don't know, per year or per month or per semester, it's up to you, you have a certain trend of sales. 0, 15, 20, and so on. This is the trend of sales. You can change it, no problem. Here you have delta sales, which is simply the difference between S in time t and S in time t minus 1. So delta sale in time 1 is obviously 15. 15 minus 0, and so on. Investment. Here you have a trend of investment. Is it surprising, this trend of investment, or you feel comfortable with this trend of investment just to touch your personal knowledge? It's a common trend of investment, so there is an increase and later a decrease of investment. Is it okay for you? It's quite common. It's strange. It's a natural trend of investment in a company. It's the natural trend. You invest in time 0. There is an increase because you start to have working capital, and later there is a decrease because the depreciation of the asset starts. And it's obvious that the trend of investment is a decreasing trend, because you can increase working capital, but there is a decrease of the value of the fixed asset because of the depreciation. So it's absolutely a common trend of investment. You see? Depreciation. The cash flow is written in the business plan. In the first 4 times of this business plan, the cash flow is negative. For what reason? Because costs are higher than revenues, so the cash flow is negative. But after the time 5, in time 6, the cash flow is positive. That means you are able to have revenues which are higher than costs. So it's a very, I hope, natural and logical matrix table I insert. If you apply the formula, we find this data of financial need or of financial gaps per time. So financial need is very high and positive in time 1, 2,500. Later we move to this number, and only in time 10, the financial need becomes negative, where negative means we produce more cash than the usage of cash. Okay? We simply apply the formula in order that you can feel more comfortable in the usage of the formula. Now I have a tremendous question for you. Let's imagine you are the private equity investor, okay? We stay in time 0, so you are a startup financer, okay? You are the private equity investor. I am Mr. Stefano Caselli. There is the business plan with this number, and based only on this data, I would like to hear from you if you want to invest in this company. If you say yes, for what reason? And the reason is not I am your teacher and I have to evaluate you, okay? If you say no, I would like to understand why you don't invest in this company. It's a very tricky question, because if you're able to give an answer to this question, you exactly touch what are the drivers that a private equity investor has to look for and to analyze to evaluate an investment. Is it a good investment? It's a bad company, even though it's managed by me, your professor? What do you think? We stay in time 0. Follow me. Let's imagine, I would like to help you. You are crazy, and you say, Stefano Caselli is our professor. Okay, we have to invest. Okay? Political pressure to do that. Okay, your first problem is how many money I have to give to Stefano. This is your first problem, right? There is the business plan. How many money you give to me? Now we have to give an answer. How many money you give to Stefano? Let's imagine that your answer is 2,500. Is okay? Is it okay or not? You give to Stefano the money which are relevant for the year number 1. If you give to me 2,500, I'm able to pay the bill to my supplier to buy equipment. You see, investment. So, it's not okay?
But what about the funder?
Sorry?
What about the funder? Does he input money on the business or not?
I don't change the perspective. I would like to see something very simple. Because if we start to discuss about the founders, we change. The problem is, this is the business plan, and you have to say yes or not. Sorry, I'm a bit cruel, but I would like to focus on the problem.
And that we need to calculate the actual value of the financial needs. I mean that.
Okay, it's very complex. I'm not a finance professor. I don't know what does it mean to calculate. I'm joking with you, but something more concrete. What's the problem?
We just need to sum up all the financial needs until we get enough cash flows to finance our activity. So we should add 2,500 plus 1,250.
And so on. So, okay. So, your idea is to say, let's calculate this sum of flows, right? If you are more sophisticated, as suggests your colleague, we can calculate also the present value, okay? but my feeling is that, your common feeling is that we have to give a look to the financial needs which are positive and to consider them as a whole, right? Okay, that's great. That's absolutely important. That's the first driver in the equity investor. The first driver you have to consider is how many money the company needs. And the answer is, you have to calculate the size of the financial need. Where the size means not only the financial need for today, because I know that today Stefano's needs 2,500, but because we are investors, first of all, I have to analyze the size of a financial need, where the size is the accumulated size. We discuss later in the second part of the course if it's relevant to calculate the present value and so on. Today I don't want to be so sophisticated. I want to understand the concept now. Do you agree? So the first problem is the size. If we stay in time zero, because you are a startup financer, the size is tremendous. Okay? Do you agree? It's a tremendous size. On the contrary, if I say you are very lucky because you are not an expansion finance, you are not a startup financer, but you are an expansion financer, and you stay in time 9, okay? It's a story of expansion if you stay in 9. Do you understand? Because we don't have the startup, we don't have the early growth. In time 9, we have the fast growth, okay? So let's imagine that you are the private equity investor and you stay in time 9. Do you invest in the company if you stay in time 9? You are an expansion financer. For what reason? For what reason?
Because in the following periods of time, the company is producing negative financial means I'm getting more money.
Yeah. So if we stay in time 9, the size is very small. Is it okay? But there is another concept which is relevant. The other concept, it's a new concept. After 1 year or after 1 period, the financial need is negative. So we have a problem of size, but we have also a problem of timing, okay? This is the other variable which is relevant. If you are an investor, so the first problem is the size of the financial gaps of the financial needs, and that's the first problem. The bigger is the financial need, the worse is for you. Very stupid, but very important. And the second issue is the timing. One story is to stay in the time zero and to wait for, let's imagine, 10 years before the company starts producing a negative financial gap. 10 years. Another story is to stay in the time 9 because you are an expansion financer and you have to wait 1 year and the company starts producing cash. Two completely different stories. Not only because of the size of the financial need, but also because of the timing. You have to wait in order that the company is able to produce cash in advance. Is it okay? So the size, the timing, the last issue which is relevant for a private equity investor is after the valuation of the size and after the evaluation of the timing, the last problem is the percentage of the size you decided to finance. It's an amazing game. It's a tremendous game, but this is the game of private equity. Let's imagine you want to commit a suicide. Okay? You stay in time zero and you say, I would like to finance this very strange company, which is managed by Stefano. Okay? You are crazy. Okay? Because you want to face a very big size of a financial need and you want to wait for 10 years. You are crazy, but let's imagine you want to do that. The problem number 3 you have to face is, okay, we have a big size of financial need. Our problem now is, what is the percentage of this size I would like to finance? It's a tricky game. For what reason it's a tricky game? Because I would like to exaggerate a bit. You can say, I would like to give to Stefano the whole amount of financial needs, where the whole amount is the sum of these financial needs. What are the pros and the cons of this strategy? What are the pros and the cons of this strategy?
If you finance the entire sum,
Yeah?
you have a higher probability of controlling the investment, therefore...
Controlling not, because you have to sign contract, it's controlling not, but you have probably higher capacity to do what?
To be more involved. To steer it, to retain, to get the return on your investment at the end.
Yeah, because you read the business plan and you say, Stefano needs this whole amount of money. If I give to Stefano the whole amount of money, probably it's easier for Stefano to be able to transform the business plan into something real. Okay. It's not a story of control. You can control a company also giving €1. It depends from the corporate governance, okay? But if you give the whole amount, probably for Stefano it's easier to work because Stefano is safe, because Stefano knows he has the whole amount of money, and if I'm able to stimulate Stefano, Stefano is able to transform the business plan in a real story. This is the big pro. And what is the big con of this strategy, of this crazy strategy? Yeah, the risk is higher for you because you give the whole amount of money, but your exposure in Stefano company is tremendously high. Okay? And the other opposite. Let's imagine that this is the whole amount of money Stefano needs, and you give to Stefano not the whole amount, but the 10% of money. What are the pros and the cons of this strategy? You give to Stefano not the whole amount, but the 10%. Pros and cons. The big pro is that you reduce your risk because you are giving to Stefano not a big sum of money, but only a percentage. This is the big pro. Okay? And the big con is what's happened to Stefano tomorrow morning. Because today I give to Stefano only the 10% of money. That means it's okay, I don't know, for 6 months. But after 6 months, Stefano needs for other money. And I don't know if Stefano, after 6 months, is able to ask to other providers of money. You remember the providers for new money. If Stefano is very smart, he's able to give a call to BNP Paribas and to say, dear BNP Paribas, I need a mortgage. It's great. But if Stefano is completely unknown and needs money, can give a lot of calls, but the banking system doesn't give money to me, and it's a tragedy for the private equity investor that gives the 10% of the needs, but now the risk is very high. So the three variables which are relevant for whatever kind of private equity investors to take a decision, and these are the variables of the private equity investor perspective, are the size of the financial needs, the timing, and the percentage of the financial need we have to satisfy. These three variables are dramatic in the very first stage of investment. Development, startup, early growth. These variables are not so dramatic when we move to expansion and to a mature age. Becomes dramatical again when we stay in crisis and or decline. Okay? Just to give to you an idea of real numbers, you can give a look when you come back home. This is a business plan of a startup of a low-cost airline companies, just to give to you an idea of the flavor of real numbers. In this business plan, the assumption is that a company decided to buy 4 airplanes, where the price of the airplanes is 100 million each. This is the price of airplanes. The number of seats is 195, and the average fare is 100 euros. Very simple assumption, okay? In the second part of the course, we have to deal real business plan, but just to have the flavor of a real business plan. If I use number in which we use a semester, okay? In the columns, I insert the real numbers which are the trend of sales, the delta sales as a consequence of it, investment, where we have the typical trend of investment, 400 million of euros, because you have to buy the 4 airplanes. There is an increase of investment because you start to have working capital, okay? But later there is a decrease because there is an increase of working capital, but there is the depreciation of the airplane, and you get to the bottom there. And this is the trend of the cash flow. Very quickly you are able to produce positive cash flow because airline companies don't pay so much. We don't have a lot of fixed costs typical of non-low-cost companies and so on. If we calculate the financial need, this is the story of financial need. So per 5 semester, 2 years and a half, we have a financial need which are positive. Starting from semester number 6, the financial need are negative. That means the company doesn't need yet money. So the story of private equity is this story. For 5 semesters as a whole, the company needs this amount of money. And the problem for the private equity investor is to say, debt and equity, what's the percentage? If we say equity, the first problem, as you mentioned before, okay, Stefano, the founder, how many equity you want to insert in your company? Let's imagine I say 200 million of euros. Okay, so the financial need is 800 million of euros. 800 million of euros is a good job for you. You are the private equity investor. Your problem is the size of the financial need, 800 million of euros, it's okay for you. The timing, 5 semesters are okay, or is it too risky job for you to wait for 5 semesters in order that Stefano is able to produce cash? And if you say yes, which percentage of 800 million of euros you decided to finance? This is the game. Okay? Let's imagine, just 1 second, 100 million of euros is too much for you, but you want to finance the company. Solution. Just in 1 second. Let's imagine you say, wow, very good business plan. I want to finance it, but I don't have 800 million of euros. What I can do? What I can do? Solutions. You are the private equity investor. I want to check if you are smart. 1 second. Solution. It could be a solution, but 2 very quick solutions. We start again from this point from Monday. First solution is, you are a private equity, you give a call of other private equity investor and to say, okay, we create a pool of private equity investors to work together in that company. The second solution is, I have only 400 million of euros because of my reputation as a private equity investor. Remember the reputation effect, the network effect. Private equity, I give a call to the banking system and to say, dear banking system, I would like to say that today I invest in this company of Stefano's, 400 million of euros. I would like that you help the company to find other sources of financing. Please give a mortgage to this company. This is the certification effect and the network effect. If Unicredit or BNP Paribas, Deutsche Bank says, okay, we give a mortgage, it's a very smart solution to give to the company this whole amount of money. But I reduce my risk and my exposure to the company's okay? We stop in this point. We start again on Monday. Okay?